All right, so here we are on day number 29, closing up with another pretty decent winner, an 8% gain on a win of $281.67. And I mentioned yesterday that my goal for today was just to produce cleaner trades. And I'm not 100% sure that I really did that. It is pretty close one way or the other. You can see here that I did take 8 trades today, and my accuracy was only 62.5%. And out of those 8 trades, 5 of them took place pre-market. Additionally, my first 3 were all losers. And so I had a bit of a dodgy start to today. I did end up going on a run of 5 winners that saw me book about $400 in profit to make up for that early loss. But I do have pretty mixed feelings about today. So the 8 trades from today are highlighted here at the bottom, and as you can see, there's nothing really that stands out a whole lot within this grouping. There are no big losers, there are no big winners. There's just a lot of middling results, and they came in a very streaky way. And what I'm going to do first is go through the trades. I don't have a lot of long explanations on any of these really, except for maybe the last one. So I'm going to actually show the charts on all of them and walk you through how my day went from start to finish. So this initial run here on MYOV, this was one that I missed, which is a shame because I really did like the bullish setup right around here, but I missed all that. And so what I ended up looking for was a run back up to test the pre-market high and then possibly break through it. And the reason I took an early entry on this one was because of how strong the news was. Mainly, at least, because of the strength of the news. It was amazing news to do with their phase 3. And they also had high insider ownership, which I thought would reduce the float enough to make this one move a lot faster than a 34 million float normally should. However, what ended up happening on my first trade was I ran directly into a hidden seller. You can see I got in on this candle here, and the entry I took was 250 shares at 10.12. And within seconds of getting into this trade, I saw a hidden seller at 10.15, and I immediately decided to just get out and reevaluate. And so the place that I ended up doing that was at $10. And this cost me something like $34 or something around there. And I was perfectly okay with that. I was like, this is going to be a big day. Everything is on the scanners. There's big runners all over the place. This looks like a home run day. I'm super not bothered by this $30-something loss. And shortly after that, I got involved on a trade on GNPX, which turned out to be the really low point of the day, I think, because I failed to realize how low the volume really was. I think just being used to trading these higher price names in the last few days, I've been accustomed to seeing a 15,000 share volume bar and thinking, oh, that's good volume. And I found myself thinking that as well. And, I saw this bounce off 81 and I thought, okay, that'll be my risk level. And what I'm looking for is to break the $1 mark for a move possibly up to 120, which was around the 200-day moving average on the daily chart. And following this volume spike, so to speak, I did take an entry here at 94, and it immediately crashed back down to 85. I decided to hold all the way to my planned stop, my hard stop, which was 81, and you can see that it eventually happened on this candle right here. And so after getting in at 94, I just got back out at 79, and was really annoyed at myself for this trade. And following that loss on GNPX, I thought, okay, let's just focus on what's real here. And what's real, the realest thing on my scanner was clearly MYOV. I was also very interested in KRTX, which had closed way stronger than I ever would have thought it would. And, showed really high potential of continuation. But at this point in the day, pre-market, it wasn't moving yet. And so my attention switched back to MYOV. And, following this big sell-off, which I did see, I noticed this massive volume spike here, 500,000 shares in 1 minute. And even though it didn't move a lot, what this volume represented was a huge amount of buying that was protecting against a drop back down. And so the effect that had was we spiked back up, of course. And, we popped from, 955 to 1018. Consolidated sideways a little bit, and so I was looking for the break back through $10 up to a retest once again of the pre-market high and hopefully a break back through it. And I don't have it marked out on my daily anymore, but you can see on the daily right here that there's a support level that coincides with a resistance level. So previous support became resistance, and that was around 1425. And in my head at this time, I thought there's no question this thing with this news is going up to at least $14. It's just a matter of how it's going to get there. And it's also a matter of how I'm going to trade it to get there. I didn't want to take a lot of risk. I didn't want to, put myself in a situation where I took a heavy share starter and then ended up having to hold it, $1 down or something like that. I didn't want to repeat that mistake of yesterday. So I was focused mainly on scalps, and you can see coming off this base here at 980, I did take a starter at 1020 of 125 shares, and on the next 1 minute candle, I did add to it at 1046 for another 62 shares, bringing my position up to 187 shares. And a very short while later, I took a insurance exit, as I call it, at 1071, just in case there was a bounce off the pre-market high. And that didn't end up happening right away. You can see we moved all the way up to just below 11. And I was presented with a pretty good opportunity to exit this trade around 85 or 90 when there was a heavy amount of resistance at 1095. Once again, I saw a bunch of hidden selling and I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I didn't react quickly enough. And so I decided to just hold the rest down to my original stop. And that's exactly what ended up happening here. You can see I ended up stopping out pretty close to the bottom actually, which sucks. But I did exit the rest at 985, and that actually made this a losing trade despite my first exit being pretty good. And so after I closed this second trade on MYOV, which was my third of the day, I found myself with 3 losers in a row and a net P&L of negative $128. And I had made myself guilty of having multiple trades open at the same time. You can see my GNPX trade and my second MYOV trade were both open at the same time, and that really had an effect on the amount of focus that I was able to invest in either one. I feel like both would have been better if I had only been involved in either one or the other. And so going forward, I thought, okay, make a decision early as to what you're going to trade. Pick one and stick to it. I felt myself falling into like a bit of a scattered focus pattern, and I really didn't want that to happen. But on the other hand, I wasn't really all that bothered. I took a look at my results and I thought, okay, well, you lost about $35 on a perfectly acceptable loss here. Yeah, granted, you made a mistake on GNPX. That's where $80 of the losses come from. But by taking this objective look at the situation at this time, I realized that my second trade on MYOV was one that I didn't capture a good amount of profit on, mostly because I was distracted by the mistake I made on GNPX. And so when I took a look at the trades that I'd taken so far, I was, trying to answer the question of, am I over trading? Am I getting too excited about what the scanners are showing me? And I thought basically this entire result so far, these 3 losers in a row, or at least 2 of them, they're all because of this GNPX trade. That's the problem. And so I just thought, okay, well, we can correct that easily, I thought maybe a more focused version of me would have seen it fit to get out, probably as the low of this candle got broken, maybe around my previous exit, which I did think about, but I couldn't react fast enough because I was distracted by GNPX. So the adjustments that I made going forward was to not look to add so much going up into the move, and to take a larger position lower down. I found that the patterns on MYOV so far pre-market were showing a lot of reactions to the VWAP and a lot of support bounces. So I thought instead of getting in at the high of day or getting in at the breakout spot like I normally would, I should probably focus on buying against support and buying heavier against support, and then scaling out only on the way out instead of scaling in, scaling out. And you can see that following my stop out here, like I said, which was close to the bottom, we did get back above $10, and then we're consolidating very tightly between 10 and 10.20. So I took a position at 10.10, risking primarily off $10, but with a hard stop down at 9.75. And so right away it dipped down and then did start to surge back up. And you can see there's a huge volume bar, once again, 350,000 shares that came up. And I was a little bothered by how we came all the way back down to $10, but I did like the fact that it held, and it was, a bottoming tail, and there was a lot of volume. Every time it kept dipping back down, there was a lot of volume bringing it back up. The problem, however, was that this is really when I started to notice how severe the hidden buying and the hidden selling were. I mean, the level 2 just became completely untrustworthy. And that is something I'm not really used to. And the other thing I was worried about at this point was, look how much volume we're doing pre-market. I mean, we're getting into the multiples of millions here, and yet we didn't really make a huge push since the initial one that was reacting to the news. And so because of all the things that I was unable to track in the tape in the level 2, and sort of the nervousness that got brought on by not being able to trust the orders on the level 2, I ended up having kind of a weird trade on this one. My first exit I'm okay with, This was, a protect against a bounce off the half dollar, which had already happened once back here. And so I sold half my position at 1047 just in case we came back down and crashed below my stop. That didn't end up happening. We did pop back up, but I wasn't super keen on the follow through volume. Like there wasn't really a substantial push. There wasn't like the clean rip that I was really looking for, and that I thought that this type of setup deserved. And so I was a little bit confused about it, and I wasn't sure how to play it. And what I ended up doing was just stopping out of the rest. I just thought, let's take a step back and see if I can, predict the movement on this thing a little better if I'm not involved and if I'm not, hyper focused on my own position. And that's what I did. And I ended up selling right into a hidden buyer that ended up holding this 1050 level. But again, I just couldn't tell how deep the hidden buyer was. I couldn't read the tape fast enough. It was going so fast. And so as a result of this confusion, I ended up not reaching my target on this trade. What I had initially planned to do was to sell half at the half dollar and then carry the rest up to 10.95, where there was still resistance fresh in my mind from the previous trade, where I did see some really, really heavy resistance at 10.95. And so that was pretty much my back of mind target on this. It wasn't intending to be a home run. I certainly wasn't planning on holding this into the open, and I didn't think that it would be able to reach that 14.25 mark pre-market. And so I was basically just trying to book a scalp on this. And my next trade on this was very similar. You can see here that I took 2 entries on this candle that ended up going red, unfortunately. My first was at that 10.95 level where I did see a lot of bid refreshing, and I thought, okay, this is going to be enough to break through. And even though there were quite a few sellers stacked up just below 11, we did break through. And so I added at the break of 11, getting filled at 11.17 for a half position. But the problem in this case is that I didn't really have a well-defined target. I thought 12 was reasonable, but above that I wasn't super sure. And so going into this trade, my attitude was very much just scalp it. And what I ended up doing was selling into wherever I saw a hidden seller. Anytime I saw hidden selling taking place, I would undercut the hidden seller and take a piece off. And that's what I did at 11.34 and 11.67, as you can see here on the charts. And as you can see on my trade log, these weren't awful trades exactly. Like I did get decent result, even though I did undercapitalize. And I ended up with wins of 3.5% and 4% respectively, which also brought my P&L back into the green. By this point, I was up to $44. I thought, okay, I'm still over trading and things are not really unfolding the way that I'm expecting them to. And to me, that was a bit of a danger signal. And so I decided to pull it back and just wait for the bell. And in between that time, I did get really tested. I really wanted to wait for the bell, but at the same time, I was seeing this great bullish setup take place with really tight consolidation, at least compared to earlier setups, where I could clearly risk off this 11.55 mark, or probably 11.50, and wait for the break of the high of day. There was consistent bottoming tail candles, which showed a lot of buying on all dips. And I was really liking it. And so I thought if we can just continue consolidating until the bell, this is going to be a great setup. Now, sadly for me, as I advance the chart, you will see that the resolution took place before the bell. And given the volatility and given all the things that were confusing me, I was unable to justify an entry on this trade, despite how strong the setup really was. And as you can see, we made it all the way up to a high of $13.73 following that breakout of $12. But I missed all of that. And then in the first few minutes of the day, the whips in the price action were just super unattractive to me. I mean, the first one was pretty clean. If you'd gotten in risking off the bottom of this red candle, this would have been a decent trade. I could have maybe captured like 75 cents and that would have been good. But I ended up sitting on my hands, and I'm glad that I did because I think I would have probably got a lot of slippage on this trade. And you can see on the next candle, the range is 13.24 to 14.44. And I can say that, it was pretty much top to bottom from 1 second to the next. The tape was just absolutely furious, and the volume wasn't even like super extreme yet. And then in the third minute, that's when the volume became just absolutely ridiculous. We finally broke through and went all the way up on a long body candle up to 15. And that's when I did start liking the situation, because we had passed that 14.25 mark on the daily chart, and there was a pretty decent window up to 16.50. Now, for this next trade, I'm going to show you the live recording, and I'm not going to get super deep into it here because I'm going to be releasing this as a separate video in my narrated live trades, and I will get in depth on it at that point. But basically what happened is I was intending to ride 125 shares from just the break of $15 up to around or just below 1650. And I did plan on adding on this initially, but it got derailed fast. You'll see just how furious everything was and how quick the action was. And the problem on this was all about my entry, where I experienced about 35 cents worth of slippage, despite having a reaction time of about a quarter of a second. And so that really threw me off, and I had to adjust extremely quickly to that situation. My initial entry ended up being the spot where I thought I would be adding on, and so I had to redo all the math in like a matter of 2 seconds. And I found my heart beating just too quickly in this trade. I found that I wasn't able to really deal with the situation, and so this really turned me off. And I ended up taking just the best exit I could get after the break of 16. So you'll see where we're at right now is there's a good amount of bid support, or at least it appears there's good bid support at 1470. And what I was looking for was the break of $15 going up to 16. So as we play this, you'll see just how fast. I mean, look at the tape. You're really gonna read this stuff and be able to identify how big the orders are. And there it goes, the break of 15, just like that. I get filled at 1543, and I'm like, oh crap, what do I do? And I ended up adjusting my stop pretty quickly, and thankfully we never got down there. And after a little bit of hesitation here in the tape, despite really high volume, we're not really moving up, and I wasn't impressed with that. I thought on this volume we should be moving quicker. And so when we broke 16 here, I throw out an order at 16.17 and get filled almost immediately. And very shortly after I exited that trade, it ended up reversing very hard. We went from 1673 all the way back down to 1466. I mean, that's, a 2-point drop in a matter of a minute or less. And this was the beginning of the end of my involvement on MYOV. And even though I did take one more trade on MYOV right here, with my entry on this candle, my exits here, an add-on here, and then exiting the entire position here. And I think my exit is really the telltale piece of information in this trade, because this flat bottom at 1450, this was a very obvious hidden buyer. And by this point in the trade, following this chop, even though we were trending upwards very clearly, higher highs, higher lows, I really didn't like the situation. I was just like, man, this stock is draining me. Like, I don't have the emotional fortitude or the mental fortitude to be able to handle this. This is so far out of my comfort zone. This ticker is completely crowded. This is getting ridiculous. And so I just frustration sold basically at 1475, which ended up being just before the eventual breakout. As you can see on this candle here, we got up to 1577. And so by selling this early, there's a possibility that I may have sold into another hidden buyer at 1440 and kind of stopped out in the profit zone. But at the time that I exited at 1475, I knew full well what was going on, and I think that's really the critical piece of information. And added to the size of my position, I kept lowering my share size, taking fewer and fewer shares on MYOV. You can see I went from 250 to 187 to 125 to 75. And that really shows clearly how my confidence was descending and how my reads were getting weaker and weaker. And I eventually just kind of threw up my arms in a statement of, okay, that's it, I'm done. Like, I'm sick of trying, and it's time to focus on other things. And so after that final trade where I exited at 1475, I decided to just be 100% done with MYOV. I didn't care what it did. If it ripped up to 26, I didn't care. I was going to miss it. And that decision was based largely on the fact that it was just too crowded and I couldn't read the tape. I couldn't use my strengths in order to capitalize on the stock. So it doesn't matter how it's moving if it's going to, chop me up and make me undercapitalize on winners. And that's when I shifted my attention to KRTX, my good buddy KRTX from yesterday, which, if I zoom in on the daily chart here, I mean, the day that it had yesterday was truly unbelievable. I mean, opening at 32.50 and closing at 96, which was just $4 off the top. It went up to 100, pulled back, and then still held those levels and went back up. and that's why I had it on watch today. But as you can see on the 1 minute chart, by this point in the day, it was kind of choppy. There was a lot of long body red candles. And even though it was still holding up despite all that chop and despite those sell-offs, I wasn't really paying attention to it until right here. This is the spot where I started noticing it. I brought up the charts. I said I was done with MYOV and I shifted my focus. And I ended up sleeping on this. I just talked myself out of it. I couldn't think of a plan fast enough. I couldn't decide where I wanted to risk off of, even though I did decide that 92.40 was a pretty decent spot. The spreads at that time were still so big that basically one tick off of the bid side and I would have reached my stop. And so I couldn't really find a risk setup that I really liked. And on top of that, the volume wasn't super strong by this point, as you can see down here. We were only doing like 15K bars, which is good, but compared to the open, it's not super strong. And what I ended up doing was I just waited for the halt. It resolved out of this pattern beautifully. It squeezed up, and it would have been a great trade if I'd taken it. But I don't really regret not taking it. So I ended up just waiting for the halt, which did end up happening at 103.78. And I noticed during the halt that the mid-halt price was gapping down. We went all the way back down to $98 before people started buying it again and moving the price up mid-halt. And so what I wanted to see coming out of the halt was a hold off of the previous high of day, which was $98. I was okay with a dip, but I didn't want to see it be too extreme. And I pretty much got exactly my wish. It did dip back down to about 100 and held 100 pretty strong. And so I took an entry a little bit higher than I wanted to. I had planned to get in maybe around 102. I ended up taking 25 shares at 103.53. And my risk level at that point, I decided needs to be the bottom of this candle, which was around $100. I thought if $100 breaks, I have to be out. I can't, let myself take a big loss on this. And the real problem, I'll just advance the chart and show you my exits here. The real problem was that we never got a substantial amount of bid support and the spreads never tightened. They were flashing up and down really dramatically. And I thought that that was probably a sign that it wouldn't really go up as far as I wanted. I was thinking initially a target of like a back of mine target of 115. And I ended up getting out a little bit earlier than I really wanted to. Taking half off at 108 and then the rest just below 110. I thought 110 was going to be the top initially. And I'm happy with this result. My risk reward on this was great. I got like 136 bucks of profit out of it. And, it did pull back. And I think that's relevant because I probably would have stopped out. Once the bottom of the previous 1 minute candle was broken, I think I would have stopped out, especially on how aggressively this flashed down. And I'll show you the whole story in the 5 minute chart because it's a lot more clear. But long story short, this thing ripped up all the way up to 132.60 before even making a substantial pullback. And then even once it did make a pullback to 121, it still had a second leg all the way up to a high of 152, which is just crazy. And even now, as the market's closed, it's still holding pretty well. I mean, it's been holding above VWAP for a while. And even though it dropped below it after hours, that's super light volume. And I feel like this thing is probably still on continuation watch for tomorrow. At this point, however, it's just too far beyond my price range. I can't really get heavy on it. And so I'm not really looking to take trades on it. But in any case, that's where I ended the day here. And as we switch back to my trade log, I will point out a nice little pattern that I noticed and I've been keeping an eye on. And that's the accuracy improvements. In September, even though it's a super tiny sample size, it's 50%. In October, I had 53 trades and I had 62%, which is definitely getting substantially better. And now in November, on 42 trades, I'm up to 69%, which is a lot higher than my lifetime average. And so, there's still quite a bit of sloppiness in here, and yet my accuracy is getting quite a bit better. And if we look at my daily results too, I mean, in the last 2 days, I've had an uptick of $850, which is, not far off of half the total profit that I've made in this account so far. And, before account fees, I'm actually up more than 100% right now. And that feels good because like I said, and like I keep repeating, is that I made so many mistakes, and some of them have been really detrimental, like the snowball day up here, and like the slippage that I experienced during the velocity stream on November 7th. And so, coming out of these 2 days, more than anything, I want to see myself not get overly aggressive before the setup shows up. I think today my key mistake was early in the day when I overtraded pre-market. It made me nervous, and it made me miss the best setup of the day, which was that breakout on MYOV just before the bell coming out of $12. In my opinion, that was the spot where I really should have got heavy, and I did not do that because of how nervous I made myself with my trades earlier in the day. So there are a few things that I wanted to talk about this day that I'm going to not talk about just because the runtime on this is already getting a lot longer than I thought. I thought I was going to be able to cover these trades in like 15 minutes, and now we're up to 25. So this is where I'm going to cut this one off, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed it. And once again, my plan for tomorrow is to just produce cleaner results. I don't want to be making mistakes earlier in the day that cost me, and I keep saying that, and I keep doing it. I'm getting away with it so far, but I feel like this is going to catch up to me. And even though I didn't do it today, my trouble earlier in the day was not a result of this. But I have had a very clear pattern in the past of coming off of big days with big losses. And that often comes from being too aggressive and expecting too much. So that's the thing I'm going to be the most conscious of going into tomorrow.